1450 WOL, Washington, D.C. 95.9 W240DJ, WMMJ HD3, WDCJ FM HD3, and worldwide at WOLDCnews.com.
The views and opinions of the following show do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of News Talk 1450 WOL, Radio 1 Incorporated, or their management.
Junior, how you feeling this morning, sir?
Teacher, Neely.
I'm still learning.
Grand Rising again, family. Today is Thursday, February the 13th, 2025. The voice you just heard was that of Neely Fuller. Today's special program will highlight the life of the author and the Grandmaster teacher, Neely Fuller Jr. On February the 1st, Mr. Fuller transitioned after a short illness. To his son, Mark Fuller, and the rest of the Fuller family, we say thank you for allowing our company, Radio 1, this distinguished honor to host this special radio tribute. Neely Fuller Jr. was a regular contributor to this program for many, many years. For the next 2 hours, we will open up the phone lines to hear from Neely Fuller's peers, his friends, and you, the listeners, as well. Now, to participate, the number to call is 800-450-7876. Tell your friends to tune in. You can listen live on the World Wide Web at WOLDCnews.com and WOLBbaltimore.com. Now, for the past 12 years, Robert Gatewood has been an advisor to Neely Fuller Jr., his family, and Mr. Fuller's organization, Produce Justice. Robert actually produced Mr. Fuller's radio program, the Counter-Racist Code Show, and also ran his website, theproducejustice.com. Robert Gatewood, Grand Rising, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Carl. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Your memories of Mr. Fuller.
Well, first of all, I want to say, like Mr. Fuller, I am still learning, and that was his signature opening. And I've said it for the last 5 years. I've produced his radio show. I feel like I have a degree in Neely Fuller University. But I think it's kind of ironic that someone who has been a perpetual learner, as he says, he's also been one of the most prolific educators of our times. And so just let the world know that today Mr. Fuller will be laid to rest over at Quantico Marine Base in Virginia. And he'll be dressed in Muskogee attire in honor of his mother, who was part Native American, a member of the Muskogee Creek tribe. And, of course, as a historical footnote, that was one of the tribes that were forcibly removed during the 1830s Trail of Tears. Mr. Fuller is just a walking encyclopedia of history. His wife passed away 3 years ago, and she was the reason that I started working with him. She was a regular listener of the WL radio show. I have a show on Radio 1 also, and she contacted her son one day, said, this guy sounds like he can help us. And, of course, I've always had a knack for justice myself in providing platforms for people who have a voice. I worked with Mr. Fuller's son, Mark, a very talented young man who really, really loved his father. He loved his father dearly. And his father loved him. The love was palpable. Mr. Fuller, of course, he worked in the Treasury Department for 32 years. He also worked he served in the Air Force for 4 years. He also served 2 years in the Army. And he just has such a long history. He wrote 3 books. He's known for his 3 books, The Counter-Racist Code. Back in 1984, he wrote his original United Independent Compensatory Code System concept. And the reason he started writing these books, he got into justice. He tells this story about how injustice and racism will just run you around. He used the analogy of like being in a bull ring in a coliseum, and a bull is just running, just chasing you all over the place. And Mr. Fuller said one day, he said, I'm going to have to turn around and face that bull, because this is going to gore you one way or another, so you might as well fight it. And that's the way he looked at racism. In 2010, he wrote another book called The Word Guide to help people understand some of the terminologies in the fight for justice. And then in 2016, he wrote his 3rd book, which was the revision of the original book of the United Independent Compensatory Code. I'll tell you a little story. Mr. Fuller, he and his son personally would pack and chip the books. He really took a delight in that. He was never above getting down and doing the work. And so he would help his son pack the books up. And I've often tried to tell them, look, this is something we can help you do. We can get a system in place. But this was part of who Mr. Fuller was. He was just a nice, genuine person. He didn't cuss. He didn't drink. He didn't smoke. And he really loved his radio show. He had a radio show we started about 5 years ago. And every Tuesday from 9 o'clock a.m. to 11 a.m., along with his co-host, Mr. Bobby, he would love that show. He would get on that show. He did the last show on December 17th, 2024. And during that show, he spoke candidly about his failing health. He wasn't trying to hide the fact, because Mr. Fuller was also into health. That was one of his things. He wanted people to eat healthy. He wanted people to do the right thing. But when his health started to fail, he still wanted to do his show. And so we did a final show on January 21st to commemorate him and let his listeners call in and give their accolades. And all this information is available on his website, producejustice.com. He also was a regular on the Carl Nelson show once a month. Once again, Mr. Fuller really looks forward to getting the message out. He said when he's gone, he doesn't want people celebrating him. He said he was big on that. He was not a big fan of celebration. And so in keeping with the code and being mindful of Mr. Fuller's behest, we should not be celebrating them today. He said, I want people to, instead of celebrate, we should educate. Education was his thing. And some of his signature bits of advice over the years that I've gleaned from him was he wanted us to eat healthy. He wanted us not to overspend. He wanted us to get a will. So he wasn't just always talking about justice. He was talking about some of the things you have to do in order to attain justice. He was also talking about do something constructive. Always do something constructive. Avoid confusion and don't argue. He coined this phrase, VGQ, that he would talk about often on his show, which is called Victim Guaranteed Qualification. In other words, every victim of racism and white supremacy has the right to voice their opinion. And so he wouldn't sit there and argue with you. If you had a different opinion than his, he'd say that's your VGQ. That's you have a right as a victim to voice your opinion. So you would never hear Mr. Fuller argue. And his thing was justice. His thing was don't mistreat anyone. That was his definition of justice. Don't mistreat anyone and ensure those who need help the most get the most help. Those were the signature words of Mr. Neely Fuller. And I really want to thank Radio 1 and you, Mr. Nelson, for putting together this tribute today. I bring thanks from the Fuller family, and they have been very supportive of Radio 1, and the feeling has been mutual. I come to you today as a representative. I've worked with them for the past 12 years. They have nothing but praise for your work and the work of Radio 1. And so we have information about Mr. Fuller on the website at producejustice.com. You can get his books, and we're going to be putting out some information that has not even been published yet, some of his notes and things like that. So Mr. Fuller's legacy will continue, and the family has tasked me with the responsibility to help them keep that legacy alive. And this show today is part of that process of maintaining the legacy, the esteemed legacy of Mr. Neely Fuller Jr.
All right. Thank you, Robert. Thank you for those words as well. 10 after the top of the hour, family just joining us, so we're doing a special tribute to Neely Fuller Jr. As Robert said, he wouldn't have wanted this, but we're going to do it anyway. This family says, yeah, we can do it, so we're going to do it. So thanks, Robert, again. As remember, the Grandmaster teacher Neely Fuller Jr., he was 95 years old when he made his transition on Saturday, February the 1st. Our next guest is Mama Tendai. She's one of the co-founders of ADASI, the African Diaspora Ancestral Commemoration Institute. Mama Tendai, Grand Rising, welcome to the program.
Thank you. How are you today?
I'm still learning. Like Neely Fuller would have wanted me to say, I'm still learning. And
I hear you.
ADASI has been part of WOL for many years, but your thoughts on Neely Fuller?
My thoughts on him, as you had said, I have his original book, And that was one of the awakenings that I had as I was growing up. I grew up in the Midwest where we didn't have access to all of this kind of information. And when I read that, and then Francis Cress Welsing afterwards, or whatever, that set in my mind what I needed to do. It gave me the understanding that I needed as I was already fighting and marching and trying to open up things to give us access for, at that time, even for voting and for us to have representation in the school system and so on and so forth. So Mr. Fuller, as you were saying, was basically a wonderful person, very humble, very astute, and he is an icon in the community. And he's one in which we need to always in his 40 days, he'll become an ancestor that we can then pray to and ask for his continued guidance on this side of the planet. On this side of the universe. So we're looking forward to his transitioning from the physical world into the spiritual world, which is basically the kinds of things that Adasi helps to do. And in this instance, when there is the 40-day celebration, and why do we have a 40-day celebration? It's because originally the week was 4 days, and it's through the various iterations and changes that we've had along the line that we have come to a 7-day week. But it originally was 4 days, and so the multiplication times the 4 ends up getting us to a 40-day celebration. And why do we do that? And this is the process that he is going through now. The same way that the spirit comes from the heavens to abode within the physical realm and in a physical body, it takes time. Look at the gestation of a child in a female's body. So by the time they meld and are able to become one, the spirit and the physical sense is not immediate. It takes time. And so it is understood that that's the same process that we go to when we leave this plane of consciousness as well. When we transition, when we meet our maker as the point which we refer to as death, then it's this period of the 40 days in which the spirit is again learning how to be a spirit and not be bound by what is on earth and the earthly requirements of the physical constraint. So what we do on the 40 days is a celebration, even though he may not want it. It's a celebration to welcome him into the ancestral realm, and a celebration where the family no longer mourns. You mourn your 40 days from the time of the deceased to celebrating that he has become an ancestor and has ascended and has written. So what Adasi is usually tasked with doing is creating an altar, a focal point, where people can actually review and take a look at the kinds of things on the altar that the person has accomplished during their life. It's a celebration of all of the things that has been accomplished, the things that he may have done as a child. The accoutrement on the altar will be completely representative of him. And the altar then, if I may, we have a poem that Sister Aza Nzenga, who is one of the Adasi sisters, wrote about the altar so that people can understand it. Because one of the things that we found is when we build these altars, people had different kinds of reactions to them, and they didn't know exactly what to do, but they felt something, but they didn't know what it was. And so our poem goes, I am the altar. I am the altar, the sacred dwelling place where the ancestors' spirits reside. I am their spirit, reborn, and now I return. I am the altar. I am the consecrated space holder, beautifully created by the divine to extend the continuum. And I am still here in spirit. I am the altar. I am fully adorned with the decorative accoutrements of life, fabric woven by our people, sculptures and carvings in the image of our people, the written words of our people, drums and bells for the calling together of our people, garnishment of fresh flowers and food and offerings all to encompass the space for our people, to spiritually connect to our ancestors, to each other, and to ourselves. I am the altar. I am the foundation that holds the soil, that uses the water poured from libations to nourish the living. I am the stones prayed over and blessed as gifts to remember each ancestor honored in these ritual spaces. I am the candle, the light, the illumination of all that is love. I am the altar. I am the life of our ancestors coming forth and going again, continuing in the cycle of rebirth and growth and joy and struggle and triumph and defeat and victory again and again, despite the odds, despite the perception, despite the era or the time. We journey on. We do not die. We transcend. We elevate. We return and we come again as the sacred space, as the altar. I am the altar, and I am here in spirit.
And Mama Tendai, let me ask you this: when is this service going to take place for Neely Fuller? Will it be in Washington D.C.? Will people be able to attend?
More than likely, we're not doing the service. I think that Brother Tony Browder is going to pull that together, and that being the case, then he would invite Adasi to possibly do an altar if the family wants us to do one.
Yes, because you did the altar for us at Power Talk conferences, and you're going to pour libations. Is that what all takes place there? Yes. Well, I'm saying at the celebration, that's when the people come together, they feast, and the whole thing is supposed to be when we have that 40-day celebration. It is a celebration, and we are supposed to feast because that's when the Spirit supposedly opens the heavens to receive the ancestor. And it's a coming together at that time. I have a cold, so excuse me the way I'm sounding. That we would feast together, and it's a time of joy and celebration and upliftment. So it would be 40 days from the date of his passing. Interesting. Let me ask you this quick question before we let you go, though. When you heard about his tome on racism, white supremacy, did you get it the first time you heard it? I sure did. For me, it was crystal clear. I was a young girl then in Indiana, and didn't know how to articulate what it was I was experiencing and feeling. My mother had been a community activist, so I was brought up marching and people organizing in our house. The Ku Klux Klan shooting into the house and whatever at night. And when I went to school, I was the first group of women, black women, who went to Notre Dame and lost my scholarship protesting the disproportionate number of black males on the front line. So all of this information coming into me was exactly what I needed to help me to be able to grow and also become. Mama Tender, we got to let you go. We got to take a quick break here, and we'll come back there with more folks. We're dedicating this 2 hours to Neely Fuller Jr. right here on WOL and WOLB.
This is WOL News Talk 1450 AM and 95.9 FM 959. To the Carl Nelson Show.
Honoring the memory of author and Grandmaster teacher Neely Fuller Jr.
Mr. Fuller, can you explain that? Am I on the right track or am I on the wrong track here when you say we're all in a prison? Is it a mental prison?
All of the above. Prison is prison. What is a prison? See, it's all about getting the words tailored so that they reveal what? Truth.
That's the voice of Neely Fuller Jr. And this morning, We are discussing Neely Fuller Jr., who made his transition recently. We learned something every day from Mr. Fuller when he was here. Our next guest, though, is John Bilal. John engaged deeply with Mr. Fuller in the 1900s, along with Bill Reeves, leading the pioneering efforts in implementing the counter-racism codification in the workplace. John Bilal, welcome to the program.
Yes, good morning, Carl, and good morning to everyone.
Your thoughts on Mr. Fuller?
Oh, yes, sir. Mr. Fuller was a singular individual, as we all know. His codification was critical to me. I came out of a Nation of Islam experience, and as such, when Elijah Muhammad passed away, all of the notions about white people, the white man is the devil, the black man is God, etc. Those notions went to the wayside for me because, to me, it didn't make sense. And until I met Neely Fuller Jr. and read the code book, again, I didn't have the language to approach the necessary problem. And of course, Mr. Fuller saw the problem as white supremacy. I agreed with that position. I just didn't know how to, form my language to talk about it. And so what Mr. Fuller was able to do was to show me a simple way to take in all that I was experiencing. And at NASA, at the time, I was a young manager, and I had many people that worked for me, and I was experiencing, various issues, and was basically mistreatment on the basis of color. At least that's the way I interpreted it. And so when Fuller came along, he was able to help me with that. One of the ways to do that, or one of the ways he helped me, was to show me that logic comes from the universe, and that in order to solve problems, you have to tap into that logic. You can't be emotional about it. You can't, for instance, play with white people. You cannot play with white people. You have to remain serious. You have to remain dispassionate. And you have to always do what he said, stay on top of your horse, which means to stay balanced, never stray from the simplest logic and what you're saying, and be extremely careful of the words that you're using. Another suggestion that he made that I adhered to was to try to be the most courteous person in the room. So whenever you're engaging with suspect races, in this case, any white person under a system of racism, system of white supremacy, any white person becomes a suspect. And this is the reason for that is that you don't know which white person is racist, because deception, according to Neely Fuller, is the form of violence that's preferred by the white supremacists. And if the words run out, if the deception runs out, then they go to direct violence. They try to hurt you or harm you physically. So these are things that became really, really necessary for me in terms of defending myself against the aggression that I was feeling at the time.
I'm glad you mentioned that, John, because Mr. Fuller always talked about people asking him about white people. Are all white people racist? And he said no, just like you just mentioned, but they're suspect. Right.
Yeah, and there should be no argument about whether you should suspect white people according to the history of, what people who are classified as white have done against non-white people all over the earth. I mean, very few people would challenge that. So what it did for me, though, is simplify the whole matter. And I asked him one time, I said, well, why would anybody even want to, why would anybody even appeal to why would the code appeal to anyone? And he told me by necessity. And it was shortly after that that an incident occurred to me out at NASA where I had a few books on my desk, and an older white lady saw the book, and she went around and began to tell stories about me and or rumors about me that I believed that, I believed in killing white people. It was out of a book. I had Neely Fuller's code book on my desk, and there was a portion of it that talked about the ninth area of activity, which is war, and how a person should conduct war if this should be conducted. And I mean, I also had in that same stack of books a book by a guy most people know. His name is Adolf Hitler. It's called Mein Kampf. And so I just was interested in dissecting this race question. And this person came and saw my stack of books, and she began to go around the workplace and saying these things about me, which really put me on the defensive, and it became a real challenge. But the code made it easier to deal with, particularly in that instance. And of course, Bill Reeves and other people who were witnesses to what was going on were very helpful as well. But do not stray from the logic. The logic comes with the universe. And Mr. Fuller would always say, I'm still learning. And I'd like to think he's still learning right now in the present condition that he's in. But I think we need to, as victims of racism, as people who are subject to racist aggression, that we need to stay deadly serious, stay on top of your horse, stay balanced. What Neely Fuller has left, I mean, he had a wonderful personality as an individual, but his body of knowledge that he left, this body of information that he left is critically important. And if he were to listen in on this conversation, he would take himself out of the question, and he would insist that people follow the logic, defend yourself, follow the logic. And justice is better than racism.
Right.
That's
great advice. And John Bilal, we thank you, and thank you for sharing your thoughts about Neely Fuller with us this morning. At 29 minutes away from the top of our family, we're doing a special on Neely Fuller Jr. Made his transition 2 weeks ago. You want to join the conversation, 800-450-7876. We're going to move on now with Sister Sabrina Johnson. She was a student and a coordinator of the Crest Welsing Institute in Washington, D.C. Now, since Dr. Francis Welsing's passing, Sister Sabrina has kept her legacy alive. Sister Sabrina, your thoughts on Neely Fuller Jr.?
Peaceful greetings, and thank you for the opportunity. Mr. Fuller, and I'll say this and move forward along with his wishes to not lump praise on the person and the personality, but get to the work. Absolutely genius. Dr. Welsing said that on many occasions, and I agree wholeheatedly. I had the opportunity to engage closely with Mr. Fuller for decades. Way back when, where I worked was very close to where he lived with his care unit, and there was a park right adjacent. So I'd step out for lunch, and oftentimes we would, Mr. Fuller and I would just talk, and I would ask a gazillion questions. We eventually, traveled to conferences, and I had the opportunity to have a lot of discourse with him and ask a lot of questions and see him in action at the Race Relations Institute conferences at Fisk University, and also a whiteness conference that we attended at Harvard many decades ago. But seeing him using words as tools and asking questions, which is the problem-solving method, was priceless. His history with Dr. Welsing is profound and extensive. By the time Dr. Welsing met Mr. Fuller in 1967, he had already been thinking about and writing about racism, the system of white supremacy, and it had developed the concept of white supremacy being a global system of behavior that operates in 9 major areas of people activity, economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. And Dr. Welsing, as a psychiatrist, a general psychiatrist and child psychiatrist who was interested in helping her patient population get better in terms of mental health, she was looking for the answer about why would people who classify themselves as white structure such a system. And their discourse just began a 50 years plus collaboration, a united independent collaboration. The things that Mr. Fuller would want us to focus on is the work, being a counter-racist scientist, engaging and embracing problem solving as your life purpose, mastering words, not letting them master you, mastering your emotions, and thinking and planning your words and your actions in accordance with the goal objective of replacing the system of white supremacy with a system of justice. And there are things that really trip us up. I also want to say that Mr. Fuller was the only person that Dr. Welsing invited as a guest speaker at the Cress Welsing Institute over decades. And in the few times that she was absent, she would have Mr. Fuller conduct the Institute. But the things that trip us up, we, as victims of racism, white supremacy, object to the term victim. But victim just means something happened to us and we need some help. We are that. And if we are dismissive of being victims, then there are no perpetrators, right? So all of the whole roadmap for what it is that we can do with our own behavior, with our own words and our own actions, it's in the United Independent Compensatory Code System concept. So I would really admonish everyone to go to producejustice.com and purchase the books, his publications, and practice them, read them. And a couple of things that trip us up. White people are the smartest people in the universe. That's in the code. Understand what that means. That doesn't mean intellectually superior innately. It means they're in the superior position in terms of authority, power, and control until we understand what it is that we do that help prop the system up and stop doing that, which brings us to the 10 stops Mr. Fuller developed. Stop name-calling one another. Stop gossiping with one another as Black people and other non-white people, etc. Read, study, and practice that. The term white supremacy, a lot of people who are classified as non-white really reject that notion because they think that means innately superior. But it doesn't. Facing the unpleasant reality of the situation, telling the truth. All of these concepts are things that we have to embrace.
And Sister Sabrina, I want to thank you because we got to move on. And when we come back, you're going to hear from people like Tony Browder, Dr. Ray Wimbush, Dr. Ed Nichols. They're all going to join us as we pay tribute to Neely Fuller Jr. right here on WOL and WOLB.
Honoring the memory of author and Grandmaster teacher Neely Fuller Jr.
Grand Rising Neely Fuller Jr. How are you feeling this morning, sir?
I'm still learning.
Your voice in the nation's capital. WOL. News Talk 1450 AM 95.9 FM 959.
Grand Rising family, 21 minutes away from the top of the hour. Thanks for joining us in our tribute to author, Grandmaster teacher, Neely Fuller Jr. He transitioned last Saturday, February 1st, actually. His legacy is truly one of a kind, and we're so grateful to his son, Mark Fuller, and his family for allowing us this honor to remember him. Having said that, let's welcome Danny Queen. Danny is a master spokesman, a word poet. His work has been featured in numerous magazines, newspapers, and publications. He's also a songwriter. Danny, Grand Rising, welcome to the Neely Fuller Tribute.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Carl. It's a great honor to be here to honor Mr. Fuller, because I've known and worked with him for many years with Dr. Welsing. Matter of fact, I recorded his lectures along with hers for more than 30 years, some 32 years, up at Howard University.
Right. And you're a poet. Did you have you want to share one of your poems about Neely Fuller for us?
Yes, this is a tribute to Neely Fuller, and simply entitled The Religion of White Supremacy, because that's what he would say all the time. The Religion of White Supremacy for Neely Fuller, 1929 to 2025. As a victim of the white side of the chessboard, the religion of black hate, injustice can't be ignored. The code book, word book, is the true compensatory key for all non-white victims of racism, white supremacy. Racism is the only religion that's not a religion per se, but for false sense of self, deeply rooted in their DNA. As the most unholy, ungodly religion on the planet Earth, it is the most unjust dynamic in all of the known universe. The black code of counter-racism, color codification, it will neutralize the fear of white genetic annihilation. White hegemony is not a bridge of hope, but a wall. But not to replace white comfort with justice for all. In the face of DEI, CRT, and white privilege at its best, we refuse to play checkers while they're playing chess. As the victims of white on the white side of the chessboard, the religion of black hate, injustice cannot be ignored. The religion of race and black success subjugation is the heartless, unholy deity of a white supremacy nation. The religion of injustice and whiteness is one and the same. For the superiority of their only God is their only white superiority is their only God by any other name. Let not emasculation of truth make our souls numb. For black love and black self-respect is our kingdom come. The code book, word book, is the true compensatory key for all non-white victims of racism, white supremacy.
Wow. Thanks, Danny. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
800-450-7876. Still to come, Professor Small. But let's go to Houston. Edward's joining us on line 3. Edward, your thoughts on Neely Fuller Jr.?
Yes, sir. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Sure.
Yes, sir.
Edward,
Fuller.
come on. We got to speak. We're in a dead air.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
I said, Edward, I said we can hear you. Do you have a comment?
Yes, sir.
And let me just say this, family. Anybody else online, this is why sometimes if you're online and you hear, don't listen to the radio, just speak. Edward, continue, please. We got a lot of folks we got to get to.
Yes, sir. I'll be brief. Got to know Mr. Fuller about 25 years ago or so. We had a lot of real interesting, in-depth conversations over the years, along with Dr. Welsing as well. His work is extremely important in the process of producing a worldwide system of justice. I would like to encourage all non-white people, if you haven't read Mr. Fuller's work, go to producejustice.com, purchase a copy of his book, read it, talk about it, put it into action. It's extremely important. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. 800-450-7876. Go to Detroit. Prima, real quick. You want to mention about your interactions with the Neely Fuller Jr.? Or Preem?
Yes. Mr. Fuller wrote, to the best of my knowledge and understanding, the basic initial requirement for establishing justice among the peoples of the known universe is to first eliminate the practice of racism, white supremacy. All persons in the known universe, both skilled and unskilled, who have attempted to establish justice and or who have attempted to eliminate racism have so far failed. Therefore, as a victim of racism and as one who is in both subject to and participant in the overall support of injustice, I intend to use what knowledge and understanding that has been given to me to help develop the correct procedures for eliminating racism and producing justice. Neely Fuller, Jr., July 23rd, 1982, page 3 of the Code Book. Thank you. Thank you, Prem. Thank you for sharing that from Detroit. 800-450-7876. You just joined us. We're doing a tribute to Neely Fuller, Jr. Our next guest is Professor James Small. Professor Small is a legendary historian, a scholar, an activist, and a dynamic speaker as well. Hotep, Professor Small.
Hotep, brother, Hotep, listeners. Yes, I mean, like, I'm sure you've heard everything about Brother Neely. What he was someone who had the vision to understand what is wrong with the environment we're living in. He explained racism, how it works, and its effect on us, and how to eradicate it. No one else had brought that to the fore like that. You know, most people assume that you could just get away from it or set it aside. And what Fuller showed us is that it isn't something that is a piece of the society. It is the totality of the society that the white Europeans have built. And until you can eradicate it at its roots, which is in the culture, the value system, and the history, and the institutions they constructed, you'll never get away from racism, even if there's no whites around, because you have to first attack the racism that has been embedded within you, meaning the African people. And so he made his contribution, and Dr. Welsing introduced him to me, and I think she introduced him to the world in a way that the world had not seen his work before. And she used his work to describe the things that she were doing. And so we need to just pay respects. He's an ancestor, did his time on the cross, as we said, made his contribution. We now need to use that contribution to further our consciousness, study the code book, study any speech that Neely Fuller gave that you can get your hands on, and try to bring into practice. That's the important part. And he talked about that, about practice. Bring into practice the things he's saying on how to eradicate white supremacy. I don't even like the term white supremacy, the false notion of white supremacy that has resulted from the praxis of white racism against non-white persons.
And Professor Small, a tweet question for you. The tweeter says, when Mr. Fuller used the phrase guaranteeing that no one is mistreated and guaranteeing that the person that needed the most constructive help is who you help. And the tweeter says, I interpret that as him saying that empathy is the pinnacle of humanity. And they want to get your response.
I don't know if empathy is the pinnacle of humanity. It's one of those strong things that one must have. But there's a lot more qualities and attributes that need to be developed in the human character. But you develop quality and attributes from knowing what to practice. It's behavior at the end of the day. What forms the behavior? And what forms the behavior is to have a body of knowledge of the environment you're in, economically, socially, and culturally. And he made it clear on how to see, especially the social and cultural environment, political environment we find ourselves in. And if you can see that and recognize it for what it is and recognize the root causes of its illness, that can help to transform your character as a human being. And there's multiple qualities that character must develop in order to eradicate the effects of white racism, because there's been no white supremacy. I've not seen a supreme white thing in any of the history over the thousands of years I've studied. I've seen genocide. I've seen greed. I've seen envy. I've seen murder on the part of one single group of the human family for the sake of wanting things, we make it too complicated. They want things, creature comforts, and they've been willing from day one to murder, practice genocide, to enslave, to dehumanize any population they come up against to get the material wealth that give them the creature comforts they want. And we call their behavior towards non-white Europeans white racism. Neely calls it white racism. And I think that was a good definition of it. And we need to see how it works psychologically. We need to see how it works sociologically, and that's what he shows us. Because one of the things we have to do is eradicate those qualities of white racism in ourselves in order to begin to eradicate it in the environment that we live in. And I think he makes that very clear.
Yeah, Professor Small, he also talked about it was global. Can you address that?
Yeah, well, that's not complicated. I don't mean to be disrespectful. It is global, meaning in every part of the earth that the European white person have invaded militarily and murdered off and carried out genocide against the inhabitants, he have put into practice through his domination, destruction, and death, this thing that Neely described as white racism, where he tries to project himself as being superior and thus having some inherent right to get everyone else to submit to their tyranny. And he does that all over the world, every continent, every island where he has touched. He has done that. And thus he's put into place systems, whether it's his socialist system, his capitalist system, his economic system is derived from his political system of domination, destruction, and death. And it's all over the world. And there's no way to define it in chunks. It's the same system. Same system in South Carolina, is in Southwest Papua New Guinea, is in Nigeria, is in India, is in China, we see it in Hong Kong, we see it in Taiwan. Some people think China is exclusively mainland. And we see white supremacy that is the ideology of the white European behavior of bringing domination, destruction, and death to other people for the purpose of getting the creature comforts he wants through getting control of whatever wealth there is in that environment to allow him to do that. There's nothing magnanimous about this animal behaving the way it does. Matter of fact, there's no other animal on the planet that behave in this destructive way. And white racism is the best way to describe the ideology that motivates him. And I think it comes primarily from someone being humanely inferior. The white race, through the behavior that I've seen and through the science that Neely has left us with, is operating out of a space of inferiority and fear.
Right. Thank you, Professor Small. Thank you for sharing those thoughts with us. 5 minutes away from the top of the hour. Bill's on line one. He's in Maryland. Bill, your thoughts on Neely Fuller Jr.? Bill, you got to listen on the phone. You can't listen on the radio. Let's go to line two then, Kevin. Let's go to Brother Shahid in Bed-Stuy. Do or die, Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, New York. Brother Shahid, your thoughts on Neely Fuller Jr.?
Grand Rising, my beloved family. My brief comment. Brother Neely Fuller, I met him by way of books with this code. I purchased it because I was introduced to Frances Cress Welsing, and I read her, and I watched her at the center in Harlem. That book I read, you had asked a question at first. When you first read that book, what did you think? I thought that this book was so simple that he was making stuff up. But then as I read more, my patient, he said, if you don't understand white supremacy Everything else you think you know will only confuse you. That hooked me forever. It was so simple in its truth. It persuaded me to read on and on and on, and I was hooked on Neely Fuller's truth and his counsel and wisdom ever since. Thank you.
Thank you,
Neely Fuller.
Brother Shaheed, calling from Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. Tell you what, we got some more folks we want to talk to. Jeff Mensch is going to join us as well. Who else is going to?
It was going to be in there. What's a conservative? Because I think that is in the textbook that people can get by going to producejustice.com. I think I have conservative in there, okay? A conservative, I've been told, starting with the dictionary, which is where you start. What dictionary? Whatever dictionary you got your hand on.
This is WOL News Talk 1450 AM and 95.9 FM 959.
Keep rocking.
And Grand Rising family, thanks for joining us as we salute author and Grandmaster teacher Neely Fuller Jr. Made his transition a couple of weeks ago. Our next guest in this salute is Dr. Jeff Menzies. Dr. Menzies is a clinical psychologist and a professor at Morgan State University. Grand Rising, Dr. Jeff, welcome back to the program.
Carl, what's up, brother man? How you been?
Still learning, brother.
Hey, proper response for today's show.
Your thoughts on Neely Fuller Jr.?
Yeah, man, Mr. Fuller, man, I'm just going to pretty much echo what everybody else has said. He was probably one of the most profound thinkers I've ever encountered, right? Met him first as an undergraduate student at Fisk University down in Nashville, where Ray Winbush would bring him in, he and Dr. Welsing at the same time for the annual Race Relations Institute. And I was over transportation, so I was the one picking everybody up from the airport, dropping them off to their hotels, picking them up, bringing them to campus. So I spent a lot of time, like in direct conversation with some of these giants, right? And they've kind of just helped to shape, and mold my past. A lot of people may not know, but he did his last public speaking engagement. I had invited him to Fisk back in the early 2000s to speak at one of my conferences, the Harambe conference. And, he had spoke, Mr. Fuller would go on for hours and not even take a sip of water. And so he was teaching as he typically does. And he actually got lightheaded during the presentation at the end of it. And so we had to call the ambulance paramedics in for him. And Dr. Welsing was there. And as they had to, took him and taken him to the hospital. And Welsing looked at me in my eyes. She said, "Jeff, go with Neely." So I ended up riding in the ambulance with Mr. Fuller to the hospital. And while we're there, I got to watch him in real time in practice. Like he was on code the whole time, Carl. It was amazing. So like they would ask him questions and he would respond in a codified way. And he would tell me like, "So you never tell them what you're here for," and, because he was there for a race discussion. He said, "Because you don't know what's in those syringes they're pushing into your body." He didn't lie. He just said he was here visiting people. It was one of the most profound brothers, man. I remember in one of our conversations, Carl, I pushed back a little bit on the idea that justice doesn't exist in the known universe. And so I just told him, I said, "Well, Mr. Fuller, justice does exist in the physical body and anywhere else in nature. Nobody gets mistreated and those that need help get help the most. So in the body, you typically don't mistreat yourself. Your body doesn't mistreat itself as long as it's in a healthy state. Autoimmune diseases will make the body turn on itself. And I've even extrapolated that concept into the, person-to-person interaction. I think that we as Black people are also suffering from an autoimmune disease, meaning we don't recognize our own body. But anyway, so he thought about that for a second. And then the next thing I pushed back on was the 9 areas, that white supremacists dominate all the areas of people activity. And there's one area, Carl, that I look at that say that they don't dominate, which is our spirit and our spirituality. Now, they can miseducate us about it. They could get the economy in such a place that we can't prioritize it, so we don't utilize it. But when it comes down to our spirit itself and the spiritual powers that come with the awakening of it and the utilization of it, they can't touch that. And that's why they work so hard to keep us away from it. And, he just kind of said, "Well, Jeff," he said, "if you're right, I have to scrap my whole." I said, "Man, yeah, right." They didn't scrap nothing. This is just a plus. This is an add-on because it's the thinking about the code as it exists and the implementation of it as it exists that allowed me to get to the point to where I could see that. And so, and then when I look deeper into the code, man, you see his concept of universal man and universal woman. And it's basically that. That's the solution. He says for us to become universal men and universal women, which means that we actualize ourselves to the highest potential that we have. And along that journey, you begin to awaken these other gifts and talents, and then it flips this concept of white supremacy on its ear, because it awakens that part of us that have us reign and supreme in any context.
Wow. Interesting, Jeff. Interesting. Jeff, thank you for sharing your thoughts, and thank you for, sharing, especially that piece where you went down in Tuskegee with Neely Fuller Jr. and Dr. Welsing. Thank you for sharing that with us this morning.
Yeah, man. My honor, brother.
All right, that's Jeff Menzies' family. Jeff is he's a psychiatrist, and he works out of Morgan State University. He's a clinical psychologist. Speaking about psychologists now, at 6 after the top of the hours, we do this special for Neely Fuller Jr. We're now joined by a clinical and industrial psychologist based in Washington, D.C. He specializes in philosophical aspects of cultural differences. Dr. Edwin Nichols, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of this tremendous tribute to a man who set the way for us all to see what was real from what was not real. I was introduced to Professor Fuller through Frances Cress Welsing. She was a personal friend. We spent many hours together, worked on many concepts. And it was clear to me when I was working at the National Institute of Mental Health, I was the first Black to have a position as a center chief. That meant I had a program and a budget. And I went in thinking that I could relate in that environment like you would in any other Black environment. I mean, any other new environment as a Black. That is, that I would have a member-member relationship. I said, I went around to them and asked each person how many years that they had doing the work they were doing, and it added up to more than almost 300 years of experience. So I said, with that much experience, anything that needs to be resolved, we can resolve it here, and what I will spend my time doing is trying to get more money for the center. Well, they perceived that as the fact that I didn't know what I was doing and began to act in ways that were just unimaginable. And then I talked to Frances, and I had my own ideas about what to do. And to survive the racism at NIMH, I worked white and came home and acted Black. It was clear to me that I was being treated as an object, and it was nothing personal. When I modified my behavior to see white racists as warlike in their behavior, I treated them as objects. I was able to survive, retire, and I get my pension monthly. Now, the other thing that I think is very important is that the scarcity makes white people warlike. That's exactly what we're experiencing today. With this new administration going around trying to collect all of these different pieces of land to protect the United States, Greenland, and what kind of nonsense is that? Canada, the 50th, and now to take Gaza and make it a resort, displacing the people who live there with no right to return. And then there's always the question of the ability of Blacks. And he talks very clearly about how not to get caught up in that. Now, the other thing that I really want to talk about is Frances Welsing took his teachings and applied them to psychoanalysis. Well, she did it so thoroughly. She took every single one of Freud's statements and applied Fuller's explanations. It drove the psychoanalytic world absolutely crazy because she took their tools, their teachings, their methods, and applied the idea that these were white supremacist behaviors. It drove them insane. They tried every way that they could to get rid of her. And it wasn't on what she had written and what she was teaching. It was her personality. she was very aggressive, and she was all these other things. So what I want to share with you is that many of us have taken the works that this man has been his whole life giving us, and we apply it in our own fields, and we survive. Because the most important thing to remember is that white supremacy is a warlike state in which we live and exist. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nichols. Dr. Edwin Nichols out of Washington, D.C. He's a renowned author, a clinical industrial psychologist. Family, just joined us. So we're doing a special tribute to Neely Fuller Jr. You can join us at 800-450-7876. During the next hour, we're going to hear from some of his friends, some of his contemporaries as well. And let's move on now. Let's go out west to Compton. Former Compton city attorney, LeGrand Clegg. He's an author. He's also, as I mentioned, he's a retired city attorney for Compton, and now in private practice. He's also a noted authority on the fields of African and African-American history for more than 35 years. LeGrand Clegg, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning.
Your thoughts on Neely Fuller Jr.?
I was elected to the Compton Community College Board of Trustees in 1981. And by that time, I had become familiar with Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. And by way of that, I worked with Dr. Billy J. Moore in hosting the African Peoples Conferences each year. And what we did was we invited Francis and many other authorities. And during her presentation, as you're well aware, and I'm sure many of your guests have stated, Francis constantly stated that her theory of white supremacy and racism was rooted in the work of Neely Fuller. And so we were so struck by that. As a matter of fact, what she stated was, and I'm sure many of your guests have said so, that she was attending these presentations or participating with students at Howard, I guess it was, and she kept getting the urge to go to the Black cultural workshops or something to that effect, or meetings. And so finally she did. And when she was exposed to Neely Fuller was the dominant force there, and the people assembling were guided by his words. And so when she attended, she was stunned at what he had to say, very deeply moved, and she told us, she said, what also struck me was he and my father had the same birthday. And so she began to share Neely's views. When you contacted me with respect to this and when he passed away, what struck me was Neely's position with respect to the patterns of white supremacy. He stated that it was cyclical and focused on the fact that you had the establishment phase, maintenance phase, expansion phase. And what has struck me over the past, especially since November, when the most recent president, what do they call it, 47, when he won, is that he began immediately to focus on the, I guess you'd call it the expansion phase or the reestablishment phase of white supremacy. And when Frances spoke here, especially the first time that she came out, she warned Black people to look at the patterns of white supremacy and how it evolves. And simultaneously, I was studying the words of W.B. Du Bois, who spoke of what happened to the Jews in Nazi Germany. And the very first time that Frances spoke at our college, she focused on the Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust in Nazi Germany. And that was an example of how severe white supremacy can be. And of late, I've been thinking about
the reestablishment phase of white supremacy as you follow what our president is doing. And he's reversing civil rights. Laws were passed in the 60s. He's promoting the suppression of voting rights. He's promoting gerrymandering of voting districts, the widespread and blatant attacks on DEI. You watch the growing stereotypes of blacks on TV. All of these things occurred in various forms during the Nazi domination in Germany. And what I would like to alert your audience to is that this is
very... do real quick for us, LeGrand. We got some more folks we want to get on.
Oh, okay, no problem. That I didn't know how. Anyway, that this manifests itself as the establishment phase, and that's what I derive from Neely Fuller in terms of the way he alerted us about white supremacy.
All right. Thank you, sir. And we'll get back with you later because you've got a great book out, When Black Men Ruled the World. I think all our audience needs to hear that. Thank you, LeGrand Clegg. Sure. As former Compton City Attorney LeGrand Clegg. We keep on moving, family. As we mentioned, we're going to go now to the Director of the Institute for Urban Research at Morgan State University, Dr. Ray Wimbush. Dr. Ray Wimbush is a regular contributor to this program. Grand Rising, Dr. Wimbush.
Hey, Brother Carl, how's it going?
Still learning.
Yeah, that's what Mr. Fuller always said, no matter what, whenever you ask him how he was. You know, I'm reminded of a passage in Toni Morrison's book. I'm going to paraphrase as there are too many things to feel about this man. And, you know, my best recollection of Mr. Fuller, which Dr. Menzies spoke about earlier, was when I was directing the Institute, Race Relations Institute at Fisk University. I had already met Dr. Welsing, and like Dr. Craig LeGrand said, because she always mentioned Neely Fuller. So we invited Mr. Fuller down for the Race Relations Institute, where we gathered people from all over the world just to talk. And, she saw him as a mentor. And I can remember these conversations late into the night. I'm talking about 11, 12 o'clock at night, where people were discussing the impact of racism, white supremacy around the world. I always say that, Mr. Fuller told us what racism, white supremacy was, and how it manifested itself in the 9 areas of human existence. And Dr. Francis taught us why there was racism. So the what and the why together at the Institute is something that I always will remember. The book that Mr. Fuller wrote, which we commonly call The Code, is something that all of us should read. There's very few books that talk about racism, white supremacy, and its origins. I can think of Wabogo's book about Cold Wind from the North, or maybe Michael Bradley's book, The Iceman Inheritance, and definitely the ISIS papers, and Marimba Ani's book, Yurugu. But very few books talk about the aggressive, rapacious nature of people classified as white. And both Fuller and Welsing did that. Mr. Fuller was always somebody that was teaching. He didn't want to be remembered per se, for like with ceremony and everything, but he wanted us to, as his legacy, to teach people how racism, white supremacy worked. So I would encourage all of your listeners to make sure that they read The Code.
Thank you, Dr. Wimbush. 20 minutes after the top of the hour, family. We'll take a short break. More people have to come, and your phone calls. We're doing a special tribute to Neely Fuller Jr. right here on WOL and WOLB.
Honoring the memory of author and Grandmaster teacher Neely Fuller Jr.
Mr. Fuller, can you explain that? Am I on the right track or am I on the wrong track here when you say we're all in a prison? Is it a mental prison?
All of the above. Prison is prison. What is a prison? See, it's all about getting the words tailored so that they reveal what? Truth. See, this is like I said about the term America, and that refers to people, even though some people say there's such a thing as an American eagle. An American eagle? What does the eagle know about being an American? See, we got to be very precise about our language. See, the white supremacists, and this just doesn't apply to black people, it applies to everybody.
Your voice in the nation's capital. WOL. News Talk 1450 AM 95.9 FM 959.
And Grand Rising family, thanks for staying with us today as we spotlight the life of author and Grandmaster teacher Neely Fuller Jr. Our next guest is a writer. She's a lecturer, historian, educator, and an educational consultant. Hotep, Sister Atlantis Browder, welcome to the program.
Brother Carl, how are you doing
Your
this
thoughts?
morning?
I'm still learning, but your thoughts on Neely Fuller Jr.
Okay, my thoughts. Well, I definitely have to acknowledge first that I never had the opportunity to meet Mr. Fuller, but I deeply admired Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, so we all know that her work was profoundly impacted by Fuller. But what I appreciate most about his work, what I've learned through Dr. Wilson, and then just a little bit of research that I've done on my own, is the fact that he helped us to understand racism and white supremacy as a global system. We often hear people talk about the fact that racism doesn't exist anymore, and I think it's because they don't understand that it's a global system. So I really appreciate that framework on a very basic level. And I also feel that his work is important because it allowed our people, he gave us a language. He gave our people a language to describe things that we've been experiencing for a long time in this country, but so many of us may not have been able to articulate it. So that's something else that really stands out to me about his work. And if I can, with the little bit of time that I do have left, I wanted to highlight at least 3 takeaways for members of your audience who may not be that familiar with him. But the first takeaway, as I mentioned at the beginning, is that racism is a system, and it's not just an attitude. And his framework helps, as many people have said already, that it really helps us to understand how racism and white supremacy is woven into every aspect of our life. And so it gives us a different perspective to understand how we need to respond to the system of racism and white supremacy. And because it's systematic, it also means that our response has to be systematic. And I believe the word or the best phrase to sum up what our response would be is to use compensatory logic. And as I dug a little bit deeper about this idea of codifying our thoughts, codifying the way that we speak, codifying the way that we behave. But I really like how he framed it in terms of having this type of systematic response without emotion. Our people tend to be so emotional when we talk about the subject matter of racism. And of course, it's understandable, but oftentimes an emotional response is not going to move us in the direction that we need to go. So I really like that idea of codifying our thoughts, our speech, and our behavior, and most importantly, being intentional about this codification that helps us solve the problem, as opposed to creating a new one or feeding into the system of racism and white supremacy. And the last thing that I would share is I also respect his ultimate goal. It wasn't about, seeking revenge, but dismantling white supremacy, racism and white supremacy, and replacing it with justice, on a very basic level, ensuring that everybody's treated fairly and the people that need help
the most, they get that help. And so our ultimate goal is to ensure balance and fairness in this society. And those are just a few things that I admire about the work and framework of Mr. Fuller.
Thank you, Atlantis. Sister Atlantis Browder joining us from Washington, D.C. If you're just waking up and just joined us, family, we're doing a special tribute to Neely Fuller Jr. You can join us at 800-450-7876. Our next guest is Trace Lawrence. Now, Trace is Dr. Welsing's nephew. Trace engaged in dialogue with Mr. Fuller throughout his childhood and also introduced to his writings before they were even publicized. Mr. Lawrence, Grand
Hi,
Rising.
how are you, Carl? I say how are you, but I want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to your audience. And I'm very appreciative of this chance to give condolences to Mark Fuller and to the rest of the Fuller family. I've heard the comments of so many today, and Mr. Fuller was, of course, well-liked, well thought of, and he is well remembered. I would like to encourage the audience to read the works of Francis Welsing and Neely Fuller Jr. Their writings are extensive. They're available. I would like to encourage the audience to watch their videos. I was surprised myself at the amount of video material that I saw on Neely Fuller and Francis Welsing on YouTube. And people are surprised, but it's a good thing to look at. It's a great source of information and inspiration. And I would like to encourage people to speak about the works of Neely Fuller and Francis Welsing, to talk to others about the contributions that they made, and to share those things with everyone who needs help. Because as Neely Fuller said, we want to encourage people to find those who need help the most and ensure that those are the people who get the most help. I want to thank you so much, Mr. Nelson, and thank you, family, and God bless Neely Fuller, and God bless the Black people. May we have success and victory. Thank you.
Thank you, Trace. That's Trace Lawrence, Dr. Welsing's nephew. 30 minutes away from the top of that, let's do the special on Neely Fuller Jr. Let's go to Toronto, Canada, on line 2. Mr. Palmer, your thoughts, Mr. Palmer, on Neely Fuller Jr.
Oh, hi, good morning, Carl, and on all of the distinguished guests and listeners. I just wanted to highlight some points about what Mr. Fuller wanted us to do and just understand how we can not cement. See, racism, a lot of what racism is cemented in the usage of words, how we use words. So, for example, if someone says white racist, according to Mr. Fuller's code, the only form of racism is white supremacy. So the reason why it's like that is just to keep things clear, because Mr. Fuller always talked about avoiding confusion. So he's talking about precision language. So because racism is cemented in the usage of words, we have to really think about the way how we use our words. So one of the best ways is to purchase his word guide that you could get at producejustice.com. And those books will help us, just like Dr. Francis Chris Welsing's book. These help us to understand what racism is and how it works as far as white supremacy. So I just wanted to highlight that, and I love a lot of the things that the guests have said. And we need to read Dr. Francis Chris Welsing's book, and we need to read Mr. Fuller's book. So thank you very much, Carl. And I just realized that you've been on the radio since 1971. I was born in 1971, so I want to also thank you for your work.
Thanks for making me feel older, Mr. Palmer, calling us from Toronto, Canada. Thank you for sharing those thoughts with us. 28 minutes away from the top of the hour. Let's go to Charlotte, the Queen City. TX Green is on line 4. TX Green, your thoughts on Neely Fuller Jr.
Yes, good morning, Grand Rising. I'm going to employ the KISS principle and keep it short and sweet, because I know you got a lot of people who want to get in. So first of all, thanks for taking my phone call and allowing me this opportunity to have my voice. Of course, the people who want to weigh in and pay their tributes to Mr. Fuller, a genius. And I'm glad I got a chance to follow Trace Lawrence, too. He's one of my best friends. But I did want to mention that the work continues. And look at this as an analogy of a race. With all of the people who come before us. Dr. Welsing and Neely Fuller have just basically passed the baton for us to carry their works forward. So it's about what can we do while we are still here in this phase of existence we call life to help make the world a better place. So I'm going to do what I can to take the baton and, as I say, run like hell to make the world a better place. So thank you for what you're doing, and my condolences to the Fuller family. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, TX, calling from Charlotte, the Queen City. 800-450-7876, 26 away from the top there. Marvin's on line one. He's in Baltimore. Marvin, your thoughts on Neely Fuller Jr.?
Carl, how you doing this morning?
I'm still learning.
I'm learning too. The only thing I want to say simply is, Carl, God gave us the knowledge to do anything we want to do. He gave us two hands. If we use them, we may not experience white supremacy as they speak so highly about. Well, I want to speak highly about simply as black people need to use their hands. Speak highly about that, and then you won't have to worry about white supremacy. Thank you, Carl.
All right, thank you. 800-450-7876. Bill Reed is next. He's on line 6. Bill, your thoughts on Neely Fuller Jr.?
Good morning. I first met Neely Fuller in 1986. I found his book at a bookstore. I read it. It was amazing. I had to stay 3 days off from work. I read it, talked to a friend. He said he lived in Southwest D.C. I gave him a call and spent 8 hours talking to him until almost 3 o'clock at night at the bottom of his apartment. He taught me the value of words and what and how words in the European languages have racism encoded in them. He has counter-racist definitions. So, for example, the N-word is a victim of racism. That is the definition. That's why we can call each other that word as a term of endearment, recognizing that reality. And then that's why it's an insult when others call us that as a name, because it's true, and we know that it's true. The other word that was interesting, that when they say white people are smart, Mr. Fuller explained to me that they are smart. Smart means the ability to get things done.
Watch the videos. Speak of the word.
All right, thank you, Mr. Reed, because we're hearing some crosstalk there. We're going to move on. 25 away from the top there. Let's go to line 1. Dr. James Conyers has joined us from New York City. Grand Rising, Dr. Conyers. Your thoughts on Neely Fuller Jr.?
Yeah, good morning. I first became familiar with Neely Fuller through Dr. Francis Welsing as a member of First World Alliance here in Harlem, New York. And one of the things that I like about Dr. Neely Fuller was the fact that he gave us a critical analysis of racism that was applicable to the lay person. It was a very simplistic analysis, but it was succinct. And it made it easy for the average person to understand and to diagnose what white supremacy was. And I'll never forget him saying, because I've seen him many times speak, one of the things that he told us was that until we understand what racism in the form of white supremacy is, everything in the known universe will confuse us. And I think it was just the brilliance of his critical analysis. It was so brilliant, of course, that Dr. Francis Welsing adopted it, and she talked about it everywhere she went. So my tribute to Dr. Neely Fuller is simply this. He was a brilliant strategist with a brilliant analysis of white supremacy, and I think that all of us need to go back and read his work, read Dr. Francis Welsing's work, and use his strategies in order for us to liberate ourselves from white supremacy. Peace.
Peace. Thank you, Dr. Conyers, calling from New York City. Family, just joined us. We're doing a special tribute to Neely Fuller Jr. Some of you know his book called The Code. If you want to join in, reach out to us at 800-450-7876. We're back in about 3 minutes with more of your phone calls. And also, Tony Browder is going to join us as well, right here on WOL and WOLB.
Honoring the memory of author and Grandmaster teacher Neely Fuller Jr.
This morning, we pay tribute to Neely Fuller Jr. as a special guest here on this program. He always joins us at least once a month, sharing his knowledge about racism, white supremacy, which he says racism is white supremacy. Also, I just want to remind you that tomorrow is Friday, and they'll give you a chance to free your mind if you didn't get in today to call us on our Open Phone Friday program, again, promptly at 6 a.m. A lot of folks wait till the last minute and they can't get in. Also, you can download our podcast. Just go to WOLDCnews.com or WOLBaltimore.com, and you can find all the information there. Download these podcasts. If you missed the end of the programs, you can just pick up the podcast and listen to the programs right there. As I mentioned, we're doing a very special tribute to Neely Fuller Jr. I got a bunch of folks who want to talk about Neely, what he's meant to them. Also, we're going to speak with Tony Browder, but let's go to Freedom, calling from Washington, D.C. on line 2. Grand Rising, Freedom, your thoughts on Neely Fuller Jr.?
Grand Rising, Brother Quincy. Man, oh man, that's, my thoughts are, Dr. Fuller put into practice, the old saying, practice what you preach. He's the epitome of that, or practice what you write. And I used to love every time he came on your show. And I saw you over the years even implement his code and practices, which, in my opinion, has to have cut down on so many arguments and disagreements because, he said what he said. I mean, over the years, it's been amazing to see him just put into practice and to demonstrate how well his code works. That, for me, I know for me personally, it saved me a lot of headaches and arguments with people because I would let them say what they said and just get out of the argument and don't contact people or be in contact with other black folk if it's not for a constructive reason. So I just simply wanted to say that. Oh my God, I just love the brother, man. I used to listen to the callers calling, oh man, I don't believe white people are superior to us. And the simple distinction that he said was it's a system of racism, white supremacy. Not that white people as individually or whatever, or as a group, were superior. I appreciate getting in here. Let somebody else get on. But yes, sir, man, thank you for having this tribute to him. And thank you for all the callers who gave that honor to that brother, that soldier. Right on,
thank you, Freedom.
Thank you.
All righty. At 15 away from the top there, Freedom Bridge in Pittsburgh has joined us now. He's on line 4. Freedom Bridge, Grand Rising, your thoughts on Neely Fuller Jr.?
Grand Rising, brothers and sisters. I want to say this, that he existed in life for us, but he belongs to eternity. May he fly on the wings of Ra. Love you. Thanks.
Thank you, Freedom Bridge. And let's keep moving. Let's go to Leon calling from Columbus on line 1. Grand Rising, Leon, your thoughts on Neely Fuller Jr.? Is Leon on line 1? All right, let's move on. All right, thank you, Leon, for trying to get in. And let me just say this. Let's welcome Tony Browder now. Let's do this. Tony Browder, Grand Rising.
Good morning, Carl. I would ask how you're doing, but it's evident from listening to your show for the past 2 hours that you are still learning and you are still teaching and you are a master teacher. While it may appear that today's program contradicts Mr. Fuller's wishes that there be no celebration of his life, today's program is actually the acknowledgement of a life well lived. And a well-lived life touches the lives of others and changes them forever. It shapes the future of humanity, it shapes the planet, and it also shapes the universe. Mr. Fuller touched our lives, and today's program is the fulfillment of our obligation as human beings to acknowledge the life of someone who enhanced the quality of our lives. That's our obligation. So via your making the airways accessible to us this morning, you and WL and Ms. Hughes and the entire team, you've allowed us to fulfill our obligation to Mr. Fuller. And WL has fulfilled its obligation to the nation and the world. They have offered love. They've offered an opportunity for us to show our love to a person who has meant the world to us. Mr. Fuller will be buried this afternoon. Mr. Fuller will become an ancestor and accessible to us on March the 13th. Mr. Fuller will be joined by Dr. Welsing, and with the combined power and strength of both of them, they will be more powerful to us as ancestors than they were when they were living, teaching, and walking this planet. Mr. Fuller will continue to inspire us, and we will continue to honor his wishes and do the work. As has been said by the 20-some-odd callers who preceded me, the time for play is over. We are now fighting the fight of our lives, and we will be actively engaged in this fight for the rest of our lives. So let us be as serious about liberating our minds, our bodies, and our souls as our oppressor has been about suppressing the liberation of our minds, our bodies, and our souls. And at this point in the journey, at this point in the struggle, anyone who does not understand what is at stake and is willing to be fully engaged in defeating the enemy, they are an enemy to us as well, whether they realize it or not. So we don't have time to debate and argue with people who lack the historical, cultural, mental, or spiritual capacity to understand what is at stake. We must work together with like-minded souls to, as Dr. Welsing encouraged us to do, fulfill our cosmic assignment. And when we do that, when our time here on earth is done, then the souls, the lives that we have touched will remember us, and they will call on us as honored ancestors to continue to inspire them so that we can restore this planet to its rightful place and ensure that justice will reign forever. So thank you, Carl, for doing what
Before you go, Tony,
so
though,
well.
before you go,
Yes,
real
sir.
quickly, and by the way, Tony's a chematologist, and he works out of Washington, D.C. He's the founder of IKG Cultural Resources. Sister Sabrina touched on it briefly about where Neely Fuller's soul is right now. Can you explain that to our audience?
Sure. Well, our understanding of our capacity as human beings and our capacity and our obligations as spiritual beings in a physical body having a human experience. Most of the knowledge that we have has come to us from the Nile Valley. And now it's knowledge that is over 6,000 years old and its DNA is literally in the three major religious systems which are spread around the world. And in these unadulterated systems that were developed in the Nile Valley, they understood that when a physical body expires, the soul which inhabits that body will review its life on earth over the course of 40 days. And as that soul reviews all the things that it's done, its successes and its failures, then the id, the heart, proves that they've lived a truthful and righteous life, then they will become a honored ancestor and take their space in the heavens, for they will be accessible to those human souls who they've left behind. This is the process. This is the black print. This is the foundation from which the three religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, derive their DNA. And so when we talk about ancestors, we're talking about beings that have transcended the physical realm, but are always accessible to those who remember them. And remembering them means to speak their names. For as long as we speak the names of the deceased, who are now ancestors, honored ancestors, then they have the capacity to continue to empower us by inspiring us, inspiring in spirit. Their spirit literally comes into our consciousness and changes us on a molecular level and aligns us with them. people have the longest strands of ancestral DNA of any human beings on the planet. We are the original human beings. We are the prototype of what it means to be human. We have over 300,000 years of ancestral DNA accessible to us. So what I take away from what Mr. Fuller and Dr. Welsing taught us, they taught us to know ourselves, to be true to ourselves, and to access this unlimited resource of knowledge, power, and strength so that we can be our authentic selves here on planet Earth and do what we're designed to do as human beings, as spiritual beings in a physical body having a human experience. Our job, our responsibility is to create heaven on earth. That is what we've done when we were free. That is what the teachings of Mr. Fuller and Dr. Welsing and so many of the other scholars that you bring on your audio classroom on the regular call inspire us to remember, to restore that which was illegal, that which was outlawed, and those who have ears to listen, and a mind and a heart to understand, to comprehend, and to put into action what they have heard. Those will be the souls that will leave a legacy behind that others will admire and honor for the rest of their lives. So this is part of the continuum, and part of the restoration process, Carl, is for us to remember what our former oppressors wanted, what they erased and want us to forget and to mock. So to say Hotep is to acknowledge the peace that we brought on the earth. For those who want to call us Hotepers, they don't understand, and there's no need to engage them in conversation. Let them do their thing in the hell that they have created. Let us be clear about why we are here, and let us choose to work together for our collective benefit for those who will come behind us, our children, our grandchildren, our great-great-grandchildren, because if we understand this process, this continuum, life is a continuum, then we will come back, we will return as the descendants of those that we help bring into the world. This is how the process has worked for thousands of years, and those who know act on that reality.
Thank you, Tony. Well said. Thank you for those remarks. All right.
Thank you, Carl, for all you do.
Yes, sir. Leon, and in Columbus, can you make it real quick for us on line one? Grand Rising.
Yes, Neely Fuller has installed in all of us who have studied and become codified the ability, the critical ability to bring justice, truth, and to counter white supremacy. Should you choose to do so, the last question and the most important question is, do you choose to do so? And if so, then do so.
Thanks, Leon. Leon's calling us from Columbus. Unfortunately, didn't get the chance to get everybody on, but if you didn't get a chance to call in today, you can call in tomorrow on our Open Phone Friday. I want to thank you, family, for joining us today as we celebrate author and Grandmaster teacher Neely Fuller Jr. Thanks to his son, Mark Fuller, his family, for sharing him with us and also for allowing us this time to honor him. Please help us to keep his legacy alive by purchasing his books and videos at ProduceJustice.com. Thanks again, Neely Fuller Jr., and he said what he said.
And I thank my audience
all right, family,
for being patient with me.